be able to lead and to teach in this environment. And I'm excited about today. What a crazy week we've had. And Austin, great job. I was going to say great job, kid, like you're a kid, but you're not. So great job. Thank you for leading us. I am turning 55 this year, so my AARP card came in the mail, or my application, and my wife has just been giving me crap. She's pointing out all the things like, oh, we can go to Disneyland for half off, or all those kinds of things she's been saying. So it's been a little painful kind of year walking into 2021. But here's the thing, coming off of this week, we could have been talking about a lot of things. And honestly, we planned this series a long time ago. And then as things unfolded during this week, some of which I saw and some of which I didn't, and I'll tell you why about that in a little while. It was just this idea of what are we actually going to do? What are we actually going to say? And I think today, the message we're going to talk about today is the most significant message that we could give. And I think that's the thing. Every time that I get up here, every time somebody else gets up here, what we're praying and what we're yielding to the leadership and the authority of God is that we would speak what He would speak if He was here. And I think some of the things we're going to talk about today will have profound impact on our life in our 2021. And we really do believe the best is yet to come. We say that a lot. We're about hope, and I think it's easy to look back and go, oh man, I just want things back to 2019. The Broncos only went 7-9 in 2019. I don't want 2019, right? They were worse than that this year, but I want better. I don't want to go back to 2019. And I think for all of us that we would realize, man, you know what? Where life is found, real life, like capital L life, is not somewhere in the past. Not holding on to some kind of normalcy that things used to be, but it's in the future. It's walking closer with God in 2021 than we ever have. There's this great passage in Deuteronomy. It's this choice, this challenge that Moses presents to the people, and he says this in Deuteronomy chapter 30. He says, "This day I call the heavens and earth as witnesses." And here's what heavens and earth, most of the time it means like the ground and the air around us. So when it talks about God in the heavens, really a lot of times it's talking about Him in the air, like surrounding us as close as He can possibly be, and actually in our lungs. So this day I call the heavens and earth as witnesses against you, that I've set before you life and death, blessings and curses. Now choose life, that you and your children may live. And I've been focusing on that scripture as we walked into 2021. And here's the deal. Life with God is capital L life. Like, it's the life we were created to. We were created to have relationship with God. And the closer we get to Him, the closer we experience life, real life, joy and peace and hope and impact and all those kinds of things. And then by the opposite, like the farther we walk from him, we don't experience those things, and we actually start walking closer and closer to death. Paul says this. He says it this way: the wages of sin is death. What we earn by our sin, by going our own way, walking away from God, is death. Being farther and farther from life, real life. But the gift of God, Paul says, is eternal life through Jesus Christ our Lord. And that idea that we can experience the fullness of experiencing God in the heavens, not someplace when we die, but in the heavens, like around us right now. And so as we think about 2021, I just want you to think about this question real quick. What is the biggest challenge you will face in following Jesus this year? Think about that for just a minute, because particularly as you think about 2020, you think about even the stuff over the last couple of days and last couple of weeks, when you think about what it means to be a Christ follower living in America in 2021, what is the biggest challenge we will face? Because that's what we should be talking about, right? That if we can identify the biggest challenge we're going to face this next year in following Jesus, that's what we should be talking about. And man, if you start making a list, we could probably brainstorm a pretty big list. Like, we could talk about Christian nationalism. We could talk about the idea that the Christians being married to this extreme right-wing politic that mars what it means to actually be a Christ follower at times. We could talk about just the division in our country. We could talk about churches that are way over here and churches that are way over there, and the infighting and the name calling and the finger pointing that's happening. We could talk about all kinds of things. We could talk about even the difficulty in gathering as a church and what it looks like to kind of regather. There's this great phrase that I've been thinking about as we talk about walking in as kind of the fear of COVID and the vaccines are happening, and kind of the impact of COVID is going to, as it begins to wane, what does that look like for a bunch of Christians who kind of find themselves isolated from church? When I was in Zimbabwe and Uganda, they have these things called IDP camps, internally displaced people that for one reason or another, war, famine, can't live at their home anymore, and they're driven into these camps to kind of survive and exist. And I think about churches, people that have kind of been driven from churches, from not from gathering in a building, but actually from the connection of family, and that are kind of trying to just scratch out a living and what it means to kind of remember the church, like put the body of Christ back together, like put this member on and this member on and this leg on and that leg on. I think that's a huge challenge. But let me just say this. All those things are really big challenges, but I think the biggest challenge that you're going to face, that we're going to face in our Christian life in 2021 is this simple idea of busyness. Think about that for just a second. Busyness is the biggest challenge that you will face in following Jesus. We're gonna step into that today, and this idea of even as some of our calendars got stripped away in 2020, some of the things that we normally could kind of build our lives around, or we had these kind of things, even as our calendars kind of got stripped away, I think there's this persistent busyness that continued to plague our hearts, and this idea of what am I doing that's valuable? How am I spending my time in a way that's valuable? How am I being productive? Focusing so much on productivity. And I think about, even if you look at some of you are probably resolution people and some of you are not, but as you start looking at 2021, some of the thoughts or some of the plans that you had to kind of be better in 2021, probably a lot of those had to do with things you're going to do and productivity. And really what we're going to talk about today is, what does it look like to actually change the perception of our hearts from this hurriedness? I know that it happens to me. I don't know if it happens to you, but my shoulders just slowly go higher and higher and higher and higher and higher up. There's times I just have to have my shoulders like surgically removed from my ears to relax in this crazy culture. John Ortberg, a pastor and a writer, this was like in the mid-90s, wrote a book called The Life You've Always Wanted. It's a great book. I was in the mid-90s, doesn't seem very far, but it was far. It was a long time ago. But he talked to, he just had taken a job at the fastest growing church in the world. I think at that time it was one of the biggest churches in the world. And as he takes this teaching pastor job at this church, what he found is his heart wandering farther and farther and farther from the heart of God. He found himself increasingly irritable. His passion was waning. So he called this an old spiritual mentor of his, or a spiritual mentor of his. I'm not sure how old he was at the time. I have to not call people old because I'm, in that category now. So I have to be really careful about that. So he said, hey, here's what's happening. This guy named Dallas Willard. Hey, here's what's happening in my life. I'm feeling separated from God. I'm feeling cold, distant. I'm not being very passionate in my relationship, and I need some advice. And he's in this book. He's like Dallas just paused for a while, and he just said this: you must ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your life. And so John Ortberg writes this. So he writes that down real quick. Ruthlessly eliminate hurry from my life. And he's like, okay, what else? And Dallas Wood again said, that's it. You must ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your life, because hurry is the great enemy of spiritual life in our day. I remember I said when that happened, it was like the early 90s. That conversation happened in the early 90s. He wrote the book, I think, in the mid-90s. In the age where our cell phones didn't have our email on them, when there was no such thing as text messaging, right? When you couldn't pull up a Word document and edit it on your phone. And way back then, in the olden days, in the Stone Ages, when that was true, Dallas Willard said, a hurry is the great enemy of spiritual life in our day, and I would say even more today. He goes on, which is really kind of a crappy thing to do. He goes on to list these symptoms of hurry sickness, like, hey, maybe you have some of these things. And so I'll just do this little survey to kind of help, add you to my misery as I kind of look at my life. And what I'm going to ask you to do, if you're here in the room, as I kind of explain what this is, I'll just say 1, 2, 3, and you raise your hand. And if you're watching online, if you're bold enough, maybe you just kind of say me. Just type the comment me, like, help everybody know kind of this, that maybe we're all in this. So he says constantly speeding up daily activities. So like coming up, he uses these specific things, which is really hard for me because it's like he's reading my journal. So as you come up to a stoplight, you see which line is shorter, and you switch lanes into the shorter line. Or he talks about when you go shopping, you might take a little extra minute to make sure that you're going in the shortest line. So which one of these is going to be the exact shortest line that you have to go into. Constantly trying to figure out how I can speed up my daily activities, which is hard for me because I think one of my highest values is expediency. How can I get the most done with the least amount of effort? That's like a high value for me. And so as I think about that stuff, and here's why, I'll just be honest, because I tie my value to my productivity a lot. I'm as valuable as I am productive. And honestly, we have a culture that's like that, right? That busyness is almost this sign of prestige. It used to be when you ask people, hey, how are you doing? They would say, fine. That would be the standard answer. What's the standard answer now? How are you doing? Busy. Yeah, everybody. Just it's like this, like, man, if somehow I'm not busy, then somehow I'm not valuable. So constantly speeding up daily activities. Okay, if that's you, if you find yourselves doing that at times and you're in the room, raise your hand. If you're online, you can just type me. 1, 2, 3. Okay, some of us are there. So here's a second one. He talks about multitasking to the point that you forget one of the tasks you're doing. So like that, I mean, multitasking is like reading, watching TV, texting, and having a conversation. Like if you're doing that, the thing you don't want to forget is that you're actually having a conversation with your wife. That's the one that you don't want to forget in that thing. So I think probably we maybe all have kind of done that, multitasking to the point that you forget one of the tasks. Okay, 1, 2, 3 if you're in the room. Me, okay. This next one. I have to be real intentional about this one. Clutter. George MacDonald writes a stupid line in one of his books. He says this: you want to know the state of your heart? Look at the state of the flat surfaces in your life. Your desk, your dresser. I know if you're watching online, people are just leaving the room right now. They're shaking their head, leaving the room. It's funny because I was on vacation this last week, so I'd done a lot of work on this message over the last couple of weeks, and I walked into my office today, and I'm just like, oh, look at all, just again, my shoulders are going like this because I have clutter. Now I have this other thing to do. I have to figure out how to not clutter, so I just add one more thing to my hurry. Oh, now we're going to go a little bit more. Actually, let's do this clutter one. 1, 2, 3. If you're online, me, type that in. I'm not seeing if you're doing that, but I'll see later. So just know that. This next one's going to be a little harder. Superficiality and inability to love. You know, it's like a boat. The faster a boat goes, the less water it like rises in the water. You guys have probably experienced that. And so I think sometimes relationally we want to do that too. We just want to go so fast that we stay on this superficial level, that we don't have to get deep, or we don't have the time to get deep. An inability to love. Actually, there's no way that hurry and love can coexist. Just think about your relationships. Think about the time that it takes to build intimacy. Hurry and love are incoherent, which is interesting. One of the things that Paul says in his definition of love, what he says, love is what? Patient, he says. Love is patient. It's not always in this huge hurry. And then this last one, I'll just point this out. Oh, actually, let's do this one. If you're interested and brave enough, have you experienced superficiality and inability to love as a result of you just being in such a hurry in your heart? 1, 2, 3, raise your hand. Me. Yes. And then this last one, hoarding your energy. knowing that I can't be fully present in this moment because I have the next moment I have to be present in, and the moment after that, and the moment after that, and the moment after that. So I can't be fully present with you in your issue and your problem because I don't know what's coming along the next thing. And so it cuts off our connection to intimacy. Anybody have issues with that? 1, 2, 3, raise your hand. And me, and I'll just say this, just for the record, me, that for all of those things, I typed it here in the slides, me, that is me. I did read that in that book, but I wouldn't have had to read that in that book because I would have just had to look at my life and go, when does my life feel really shallow? What are some things that represent that? And So we were on, my family and I were on this vacation, this little 4-day vacation to Mount Princeton. If you've never been to Mount Princeton Hot Springs, great little spot. It's got these little hot springs that are by this river. It's incredible. And I was there by myself one morning, kind of waiting for everybody to get there. And I'm just laying in this hot springs, watching the steam come up. And I began to think, man, I'm not being very productive. I'm not. I should be like reading. I should have brought my journal down here. I should have done something. So this is true. So I lay down and I'm like, I'll just go through my talk in my head. So I'm just laying there thinking, I'll make this time productive. I'm just gonna figure out what I'm gonna say about just living a life of slowness, about not being in a hurry. And really, in that moment. This idea struck me that I wasn't created to be simply productive. I was created for connection, for relationship with God. And so are you. You are created for relationship with God. And not to simply be productive. And here's this cool thing. That means that every moment counts, right? So as I'm laying there in that hot spring, my value doesn't come from my productivity. My life, remember capital L life, as I draw closer to my connection with Jesus, I find life there. And that can happen in every moment of every day. So when I talk about slowing, as we kind of get into some of these specifics, what I'm not saying is that you have to just strip everything out of your calendar and start from scratch. What I'm really saying is that it's a mindset more than a schedule change. Does that make sense? It's like, oh, I'm sitting here doing the same work, but my goal isn't productivity. My goal is connection with God, and maybe helping other people connect to the truth of who God is, the love of God. And the reality is, as we look at the life of Jesus, we're going to open the Bible in just a minute. As we look at the life of Jesus, not only did he live this life, he cast vision for this life. And we're not going to get into it today, but when you get home, if you are home, maybe later today, look up Luke 10. This is the story of the Good Samaritan. It's this famous story. This guy gets beat up, on the road dying. Jesus is telling the story, and he says a priest comes by, sees what's happening, goes along the way. This Levite comes by, sees what's happening, goes on the way, but a Samaritan comes, he said. And he actually paid this price, the price of attention, the price of time, the price of being willing to be interrupted. The hero of that story was the Good Samaritan, and he showed this life of unhurriedness, this life of willingness to be interrupted. Jesus is casting vision for that for us. And he lived that kind of life. Actually, one of the things that Dallas Willard says is the one-word description for Jesus, he would say, is relaxed. That Jesus was certainly, his schedule was certainly full, but never hurried. And we're going to look at the Bible. So if you have your Bibles, open up to Mark chapter 5. You can just look, it's the NIV if you're looking on your phones. Mark chapter 5 is the version the NIV is the version I'm going to be reading out of. It's just, I love Mark. It's my favorite book of the Bible. It's just action-packed, action-packed, action-packed. But in the middle of all this action, we see this unhurried Jesus. So we're going to look we're going to pick up the story in verse 21, actually kind of a couple of stories kind of put together. So, In verse 21 of Mark chapter 5, when Jesus again had crossed over the boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered around him. And just underline this, while he was by the lake, which is really hard to do on your phone, but some of you have like fancy Bible apps, so you could like highlight that. While he was by the lake, and let me just say this real quick. One of the things I want you to pick up on as you read the life of Jesus is how many times this phrase occurs, or phrases like it occurs, like on the way this happened. While he was here, this happened. Jesus was never in a hurry that he couldn't be interrupted. While he was by the lake, one of the synagogue leaders named Jairus came. When he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet and he pleaded earnestly with him, "My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live." And Jesus went with him. Pretty urgent thing, right? Can you imagine being Jairus and trying to figure out what in the world am I going to do? My daughter's dying. And it says, man, maybe this Jesus guy, maybe this is the guy that's going to help me. And waiting, can you imagine waiting as Jesus is rowing, or his boat is kind of sailing to the shore? His heartbeat's going faster and faster. He keeps looking at his watch. He keeps texting his wife saying, "How's my daughter doing?" All those things are happening. And Jesus finally shows up. He kind of works his way through the crowd, and he just presents Jesus with this thing. And Jesus decides to go with him. Jesus went with him. And a large crowd followed and pressed around him. And then here's this other part of the story that's happened. And a woman who was there had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and spent all she had. Instead of getting better, she grew worse, which is an interesting thing. As we try and cultivate our own problems, our own answers to our problems, we kind of get farther and farther from life. But when she heard Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, if I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. And immediately her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from the suffering. At once Jesus realized that power had gone from him, and he turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" You imagine you're just in this crowd, everybody's kind of pressing in. Jesus is like, "Wait, who touched me?" Which is an interesting thing. That's why his disciples answer this way. You see people, I think there's lots of eyebrow raising. There's lots of maybe eye rolling happening with his disciples right now. You see people crowding against you, his disciples answered, and yet you answer, "Who touched me?" There's like lots of people touching you, Jesus, and we're like on the way. Remember Jairus, like we have this thing going on, and then look at this next little phrase, but Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, and trembling with fear, he told him the whole truth. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." And Jairus is like, "Can't you say that later? My daughter is dying." And while Jesus was speaking, some people came up from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. "Your daughter's dead." They said, "Why bother the teacher anymore?" And overhearing what they said, Jesus told them, "Don't be afraid, just believe." And Jesus goes, and Jesus actually ends up raising Jairus' daughter from the dead. And I just wrote in my Bible, the power of God is not constricted by time. We look at the life of Jesus, this life beautifully lived in intentional living, in unhurriedness, because he knew, I'm not created simply to be productive. I'm not here to be productive. I'm here to be connected. We're created for a relationship with God, not simply to be productive. So as we think about, man, I look at the Bible so many times and I'm thinking, oh man, Jairus and this woman both of them are so lucky that I'm not Jesus. Jesus had a really busy day on the other side of the lake, and then he just kind of rolled along the lake, and I would just have my head down trying to get someplace, or I might pull my calendar out, like when this Jairus kind of like, hey, can I just do that tomorrow? 'Cause I just have somebody, and Jesus was just like willing to step in. And here's an interesting thing, because I think sometimes we protect ourselves. We think what it means to be not busy is protect ourselves from saying yes. It's not necessarily protecting ourselves from not saying yes. It's making sure we say yes to the right things, and making sure that we say yes with the right perspective of like, oh, this is an opportunity for me to connect with who God is, or help this person connect with who God is, not just to simply make myself feel good. And I want to be good at it. I'm not very good at this. I want to be good at it. I want to be good at not being hurried. I want to be good at slowing, but I'm not very good at it. And so we have two choices. One of the things that book by John Ortberg is great. It talks about these spiritual disciplines. He talks about spiritual practices. And he kind of frames them in this way of we have two options when we realize we're not where we need to be. He frames it this way. It's like it's training versus trying. And I would just say this, wouldn't it be great to dunk a basketball? I would love to dunk a basketball. I could totally dunk a basketball when I was younger, like in an 8-foot rim. I could. But here's the thing. If I said, man, you know what? I wanted my 2021 to be about. I want to dunk a basketball by the end of 2021. I want to be able to dunk a basketball. I think I could do it. Don't laugh. I think I have to quit everything else I'm doing, but I could do it. But here's two ways that I could do that. One way I could try. If I just got a basketball and I just went out here to our parking lot and just started jumping and trying, right? Just every day I just spend all this time trying. I probably wouldn't get very, very much better. The second thing is training. I could go, oh, you know what it takes to dunk a basketball? To not weigh so much. So I'm going to have to start eating right. And for me to have more springiness in my legs, so I'm going to have to start stretching. And for me to have more explosion in my calves, so I need to start lifting weights. All those kinds of things together, those practices, will help me accomplish something tomorrow that I can't accomplish today. Does that make sense? It's a difference between training and trying. And I think in our Christian lives, I think so much of our Christian lives is just gritting our teeth and trying real hard. Like hearing a message like this and go, oh yeah, you know what? I need to be less busy. I need to have a better perspective on what it means to be less busy. Instead of that, I just want to suggest a couple of different things. Some things actually that Jesus did, some practices that Jesus did that enabled him to live this life, this capital L life. And this first one, we've talked about a lot actually around here, and I want to keep elevating the value of this. The first one we're talking about is this idea of Sabbath. I do find it interesting that there's a large portion of Christ followers that are really eager to point out lots of different kinds of sin, and at the same time just completely neglect what Jesus talked a lot about, this idea of practicing Sabbath, of saying I'm going to actually spend some time in my life where I'm not working, where I can have some focused time, just me and the Lord together. I think there's a tiny fraction of Christ followers that actually have a practice of Sabbath. Sabbath is basically, it isn't this thing that God says, prove to me how much you love me by staying on your couch and reading your Bible all day. It's actually saying, oh, you know what? You can trust me for 7 days provision for 6 days of work. That's how you can trust me. And this time is a resetting time. You know, as we go, and I'm not sure about you, but my schedule just feels like it goes faster and faster and faster and faster. And as it does, it gets farther and farther and farther, just incrementally farther from pursuing the things of God. I just find myself over time, when I don't think about it, and this idea of Sabbath, and even this idea of daily Sabbath, of taking a little bit of time every day to kind of refocus and recalibrate back to kind of where God's leading me, is hugely important. I have a friend, Kevin, and I might have shared this. He came and did a little thing for our staff a while ago, and he talked about Sabbath, like this idea of getting off of a roller coaster. You know, when you're at an amusement park that's not very busy, and you go on the roller coaster, and the ride attendant goes, you just want to go again? 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 And you kind of just get caught on that. And he's like, that's kind of what life is like. This idea of here's this life. And so the value of getting off the roller coaster, walking down the thing, and then standing there and going, do I want to re-engage in that? Do I want to get back on the roller coaster, right? And I think the idea of Sabbath, to take a time every week, and it doesn't have to be Sunday or Saturday. It can be this time every week where you just say, hey, this time I'm going to turn off my electronics. I'm going to take a deep breath. I'm going to focus on rest, and I'm going to focus on God's provision for me. And sometimes that's going to be a day, and sometimes it's going to be an hour, sometimes it's going to be a half a day. Begin a spiritual practice of Sabbath. And then here's this thing. As you choose to get back onto your wheel, as you choose to get back into your schedule, there's this intentionality that comes with it and go, oh, you know what? I want to come back to this thing. So begin a Sabbath practice. Just say, man, if I don't do anything different, anything extra in 2021, I'm going to begin a Sabbath practice. I'm going to allow God to lead me in this idea of Sabbath. And then the second thing, slowing. John Ortberg talks a lot about slowing as a spiritual discipline. It's this willingness to slow down. Remember I talked about the traffic light and the groceries thing, to say, here's how I can practice that. I can actually pick the longest line at the grocery store. That just gives me the creeps when I even say that out loud. But I've been trying to do that. Driving in the slow lane, like being intentional to drive in the slow lane. That takes some skill. I was actually doing that on the way back. I had a friend that needed me to pick something up at the airport for them, so I went to the airport yesterday. I'm driving back, and I'm like, yeah, I'm going to drive. And, I-70, I'm like, I'm going to drive in the right lane on I-70 all the way home. So I'm in the right lane, driving, going at times like 45 miles an hour, screaming, can you at least go the speed limit in the slow lane? And I'm like, oh, wait, this is good for me. I got to just not scream at the person that's in front of me. And it's crazy how just out of habit you get in patterns. So I'm really intentionally driving from the airport, I don't know how far, almost to downtown. And I just put my turn signal on. And I didn't think about it. I'm just like, I'm getting out of this lane. I didn't make a choice to get out of that lane, but I just put the turn signal on. And I look up, and this construction sign just said, use caution, slow down. Like, God, come on. You can't give me a break from the Purina factory to I-25. I can't get a break to... But you know what those things do? It just is this subtle reminders of this time can be valuable. It isn't, I'm not valuable. One of the things we don't see Jesus ever go, man, I'm in too big of a hurry to go I'm going from here to here is because I have something big happening here. He was imminently interruptible. And for us to be able to say, oh, you know what? I'm going to use this time to focus on how I'm created for connection with God. And not productivity, not simply productivity. We are created for relationship with God and not simply productivity. And I've been talking way too long. But we read this verse together, this passage together at the beginning of the service. And I want to encourage you, whether you're at home, just read it out loud at home, or we're going to read it out loud here, because it's the promise of Jesus, this vision that Jesus has for our lives that can really impact not just our 2021, but the rest of our lives. So we're going to read it. And remember, when we read scriptures here, we don't read like we're at church. We actually read like we're passionate about it. So we're going to do that on 3. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Are you tired, worn out, burned out on religion? Come to me. Get away with me, and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Stop right there. Go back. Will you go back? Sorry. I wanted to mention this little thing. Walk with me, he says. We were on a walk, and our staff takes a walk on Tuesdays, and we're walking around the neighborhood. And we're walking pretty fast, and one of our staff's like, "Hey, can we slow down?" And we had this long conversation. Our friend Josh Brink is on staff as a pastor of Connection and Community Responsibility. Spent a lot of time in Uganda. And he's like, "Oh yeah, I realize I'm walking like an American." That's what my Ugandan friends would say. You're walking like an American. Like you're not just walking to enjoy it. You're walking like you have some place to go. And I love, man, as I heard that and I read this thing, Jesus is like, walk with me. Not like an American, like, good, we have some place to go, but just walk with me to be with me. So let's start again there. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me, and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. Doesn't that sound good? Let's pray. Jesus, we're just so thankful for you. And as we get ready to sing this little conclusion song, I've asked that you would teach us, lead us, help us to walk with you and work with you so that we can see how you do it. Thanks, God.